Welcome to the Labor Force Podcast, where we talk about the rise of labor militancy and the fact that capitalism is a rotten deal. I'm your host, Mike Strukin, proud member of New York State United Teachers. Well, politicians, economists, and business leaders always talk about the economy in terms of growth, stock markets, GDP, and unemployment rates. But if you want to know how ordinary people are actually experiencing the economy, there's a much simpler question to ask. Are workers feeling secure enough to fill up their gas tanks, buy a home, save money, and plan for the future? Right now, the answer appears to be no. New inflation data released this week showed consumer prices rising at a 4.2% annual rate, the highest level seen in roughly 3 years. Much of that increase has been driven by higher energy costs tied to the ongoing conflict involving Iran, with gas prices and transportation costs pushing household budgets further into the red. For working families whose wages were already struggling to keep pace with housing, healthcare, and childcare costs, another round of inflation feels less like an economic statistic and more like another pay cut. Despite rising inflation, Trump recently remarked Wednesday that he loves the inflation, a statement that is likely to sound very different to workers watching their budgets shrink.
Are you concerned, Mr. President, about the latest inflation number which came out this morning? Could that be a
No, I love it. The numbers were great. You know what I really love? I love the inflation. You know why? Because as soon as this war is over, I can say it now. Something you didn't know. Do you know we've been taking out millions of barrels of oil? Nobody knows it. You know who doesn't know about it? Iran until right now. We took out the other night 22 ships late at night with no lights because they don't have any radar because we blasted the crap out of it.
Inflation to come down between now
when the war's over?
Yes.
It's coming down.
I know you can't.
It's going to come down like a rock.
That's right. A sitting president remarkably said, "I love the inflation." And hands up if you really think this Iran situation will be over anytime soon. At the same time, Americans are becoming increasingly pessimistic about their own financial situations. Recent survey data from the New York Federal Reserve found household financial worries at their highest level since 2022. More people report being worse off financially than they were a year ago, and expectations about future finances are becoming more negative as well. And that anxiety isn't just showing up in surveys, it's showing up in how people spend money. Retailers across the country report that consumers are making small but telling adjustments to their daily lives. Some drivers are leaving gas stations without completely filling their tanks. Families are cutting back on discretionary purchases. Shoppers are delaying furniture purchases, making fewer trips to clothing stores, and searching more aggressively for discounts in value-oriented retailers. People are still spending, but they're spending differently because they're trying to stretch every dollar further. Taken individually, these decisions might seem insignificant, but collectively, they paint a picture of a workforce that feels economically vulnerable. When workers begin rationing gas, postponing purchases, and abandoning non-essential spending, they're signaling that financial stability is becoming harder to maintain. And that helps explain another striking finding from a recent CNBC survey. A growing share of Americans believe the traditional American dream is slipping out of reach. Home ownership, financial security, retirement savings, and upward mobility increasingly feel unattainable to many workers, especially younger generations who entered adulthood facing student debt, rising housing costs, and recurring periods of economic instability. The problem isn't simply that people want more. It's that many feel they're working hard without getting any closer to the economic milestones previous generations were told to expect. And this is where labor issues become impossible to separate from broader economic discussions. Inflation matters, interest rates matter, energy prices matter, but for workers, the central question is whether wages, benefits, and job security are keeping pace with the cost of living. If productivity rises while housing becomes less affordable, if workers continue producing wealth while feeling less secure every year, then headline economic growth starts to look increasingly disconnected from everyday reality. The story developing right now isn't just about inflation, however. It's about confidence. Confidence that a paycheck can cover basic needs. Confidence that hard work leads to stability. Confidence that the future will be better than the present. And when that confidence begins to erode, workers don't need an economist to tell them something is wrong. They already know it every time they check their bank account, pull up to a gas pump, or wonder whether the life they were promised is still achievable. In other words, workers aren't losing confidence because of headlines. They're losing confidence because of lived experience. That said, for years, Americans have been told a simple formula for success. Work hard, get an education, and opportunities will follow. But for a growing number of workers, especially younger Americans, that promise feels increasingly detached from reality. Imagine being told your entire life that college is the path to opportunity, only to graduate into a labor market where nearly half of degree holders are working jobs that don't require those degrees. A recent CBS News report highlighted the struggles facing young job seekers entering today's labor market. The unemployment rate for young workers is roughly double the national average, and around 40% of employed college graduates are working in jobs that don't actually require a college degree. Columbia Business School economist Laura Veldkamp put it bluntly, saying that people trying to find jobs for the first time are experiencing, quote, the hardest time they've had in years. And while politicians and business leaders point to headline job growth numbers as proof that the economy is healthy, those statistics often mask a much uglier reality. The Times of India recently examined what it called America's mid-career stall, a phenomenon affecting millions of workers who find themselves trapped in jobs with little opportunity for advancement, higher wages, or long-term stability. Even after the post-pandemic hiring boom, many workers are discovering that simply staying employed is no guarantee of economic mobility. The traditional pathway from entry-level work to a secure middle-class life is becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. And what's particularly striking is that these problems are unfolding at the same time that many economists are claiming the labor market's improving. Job openings have risen, payroll growth has exceeded expectations, and unemployment remains relatively low by historical standards. Yet workers continue reporting intense frustration with the hiring process and a growing sense that opportunities are shrinking rather than expanding. And part of the disconnect may be that not everyone's benefiting equally from whatever recovery is taking place. Fast Company reports that recent job gains have disproportionately gone to men, while women have continued leaving the workforce. According to analysis from the National Women's Law Center, women accounted for a net loss of jobs in May, even as overall employment increased. The result is a labor market that may be recovering on paper, while leaving significant portions of the workforce behind. So these stories paint a picture of an economy that looks strong from 30,000 feet, but feels very different on the ground. Young workers can't get their foot in the door. Mid-career workers are struggling to move up. Women are falling behind in the latest hiring gains. And millions of Americans are discovering that hard work alone is no longer enough to guarantee economic progress. For labor advocates, this should serve as a reminder that low unemployment rates and stock market gains are not measures of worker prosperity. The real question isn't whether jobs exist. It's whether those jobs provide security, advancement, dignity, and a future worth building toward. For too many workers in 2026, the answer appears to be no. And before I get into the next story, let me start with something familiar. I'm a public school teacher here in New York. When I want to introduce a new text into my curriculum, I have a voice in that process. I fill out paperwork. I explain my reasoning. I answer questions. I participate. Now imagine that voice largely disappears. What happens when your employer decides your voice no longer matters? First, it probably affects your pay. According to the Chronicle of Higher Education, faculty salaries have largely failed to keep pace with inflation for years, even as compensation for college administrators has continued to rise. Data shows that inflation-adjusted faculty pay has stagnated or declined across much of higher education, leaving many professors struggling with rising housing, childcare, and living costs. Meanwhile, colleges and universities have expanded administrative ranks and increased executive compensation, contributing to a widening pay gap between campus leadership and instructional staff. The piece notes that tenure-track faculty salaries are now significantly lower in real terms than before the pandemic, while administrative pay has generally grown faster than inflation. As one analysis cited in the article found, there's evidence, quote, of the general trend in higher education and the economy as a whole of increasing distance between senior executives and production workers. The article argues that this imbalance has fueled frustration among faculty members, intensified labor disputes, and yes, unionization efforts, and raised questions about institutional priorities as colleges face financial pressures and enrollment challenges. Then the boss, or in this case, the board of trustees, makes all the decisions, and you just get to take it despite doing all the work. That appears to be the situation facing faculty members at Auburn University. They're criticizing a decision by the university's Board of Trustees to dissolve the Faculty Senate and replace it with a new Presidential Academic Advisory Council, arguing that the move weakens shared governance and diminishes faculty influence over academic policy. Professors interviewed by AL.com described the change as an attack on our voices, contending that the Faculty Senate served as an important mechanism for elected faculty representatives to participate in decisions affecting curriculum, academic standards, and university operations. The board's action came alongside a policy granting trustees greater direct authority over curriculum and academic matters. And how experienced are those trustees with actual students? You can guess it, not at all. Faculty leaders in the local chapter of the American Association of University Professors expressed concern that the new structure shifts governance from a faculty-led model to one controlled by administrators. In a statement referenced by coverage of the decision, the Auburn AAUP chapter argued that the replacement council represents, quote, a shift from faculty-led governance to administratively controlled consultation. Critics say that while the previous Senate was advisory, it provided an independent and elected voice for faculty, whereas members of the new council will be selected in part by university leadership. University officials and trustees have defended the changes as a way to create clearer lines of authority and accountability, while still preserving opportunities for faculty input. The board stated that faculty perspectives will continue to be heard through the new advisory council, but final authority over curriculum, degree requirements, and related academic matters will rest with the trustees. Faculty opponents, however, fear the move could undermine academic freedom, reduce transparency, and make it more difficult for professors to influence decisions that directly affect teaching and research. The controversy has become part of a broader national debate over shared governance, political oversight, and faculty authority in higher education. So the dispute isn't really about a committee. It's about who gets to participate in decisions that shape their working lives. Meanwhile, one of the big promises of modern capitalism and new technology has been that work would get easier, freer, and more human. Work from anywhere, make your own schedule, skip the commute. And to be fair, for a lot of people, those changes really have improved daily life. But there's a catch that doesn't show up on a productivity dashboard. When employers and policymakers obsess over efficiency, the human side of work can get treated like an afterthought. And two recent research stories underline that point in very different ways. Let's start with remote work. A new report highlighted by NPR pulls together a growing body of evidence suggesting that working remotely can come with a serious downside: isolation. In one large analysis, researchers looked at data from more than 500,000 Americans. They found that people in jobs that could be done remotely were spending a lot of time alone after the pandemic. And that increase in alone time wasn't just a lifestyle detail. It correlated with worse mental health outcomes, more use of mental health services, and greater reliance on prescription medications. The impact was especially intense for people who live alone. Now, it's important not to overreact to that. This isn't a rant against remote work. Remote work can mean flexibility, fewer hours lost to commuting, lower costs, and more control over your day. For many workers, those are real, tangible benefits. The problem is what happens when remote work is treated mainly as a cost-cutting tool. When an employer shuts down offices or keeps teams fully remote without building new ways to support connection, something quietly disappears. The small social moments that make work feel like it involves actual human beings. A quick chat before a meeting, the informal lunch break, the little check-in that isn't on a calendar invite. Those interactions can sound trivial until they're gone, and then suddenly work starts to feel purely transactional. Tasks in, output out, repeat. So that's one side of the modern work story. People completing their jobs, meeting their goals, maybe even getting praised for their efficiency, while their day-to-day experience becomes more solitary than they ever expected. Now let's talk about a very different group of workers, people who work through the night while most of society is asleep. A study reported by Vice looked at data from more than 14,000 participants in the UK Biobank, focusing on people who regularly do night shifts. The researchers found measurable reductions in the volume of certain brain areas linked to emotional regulation, attention, memory, and the body's sleep cycles. The changes were described as relatively small, but they were consistent across a large population, which is what makes the finding hard to shrug off. And the likely mechanism here isn't mysterious. It comes down to circadian rhythm, the internal clock that evolved to sync our bodies with daylight and darkness. Night work forces the body to live out of phase with that clock, and the strain shows up across sleep, mood, and long-term health. One detail that stands out is that some effects may stabilize or even partially reverse when people stop working night shifts. That's encouraging on an individual level, but zoom out and the larger message is still unsettling. We already have decades of research linking shift work to higher rates of depression, cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, and chronic sleep disorders. What's new here is the suggestion that the disruption might also be reflected in subtle structural differences in the brain itself. If you step back, these two stories, remote isolation and night shift disruption, expose the same contradiction at the center of modern work. Workers are often told they should be grateful for flexibility, grateful for 24-hour operations, grateful for technology that makes everything more efficient. But whether you're alone in a home office or you're on an overnight schedule in a warehouse, hospital, factory, or distribution center, the cost can land directly on workers' bodies and minds. And that leads to the bigger question. Why is it so common that workers are expected to absorb the health and psychological consequences while employers capture most of the economic upside? The labor movement has argued for a long time that work should be organized around human needs, not the other way around. These studies back that up in a very grounded biological way. People need connection. People need rest. People need predictable rhythms. No performance metric and no quarterly report can negotiate with the basic facts of being human. So maybe the debate shouldn't be framed as remote work versus office work or night shift versus no night shifts. Remote work will exist. Night work will exist. The real issue is whether we build modern work systems that acknowledge the human costs up front and reduce them, rather than quietly outsourcing them onto workers' health. If the future of work is going to be genuinely better than the past, it can't just be more flexible or more technologically advanced. It has to be more humane. Continuing with that general theme, one of the biggest promises made about AI is that it will free workers from repetitive tasks and allow people to focus on more meaningful work. But for many workers, AI is arriving alongside layoffs, reorganizations, and shrinking teams. A recent report on Meta's latest restructuring illustrates that reality. As part of a major AI-focused overhaul, the company eliminated roughly 8,000 jobs, about 10% of its workforce, while moving thousands of remaining employees into AI-related roles. NDTV followed one employee who technically survived the cuts, but watched her entire team disappear. Her title changed, her responsibilities shifted, and many of the colleagues she relied on were suddenly gone. That story highlights something often overlooked in discussions about automation. Job loss isn't the only consequence of workplace restructuring. Even workers who remain employed can face heavier workloads, greater uncertainty, and the loss of the professional relationships that make work sustainable. And Meta isn't unique. Across the tech sector, executives increasingly describe AI as a tool for efficiency and organizational streamlining. Companies are investing billions into AI infrastructure while simultaneously asking workers to adapt to new roles, new expectations, and leaner staffing models. For labor, this raises a much larger question. If AI dramatically increases productivity, who benefits from those gains? Historically, new technologies have often been introduced as labor-saving tools, yet the rewards have frequently flowed upward while workers face layoffs, intensified workloads, or stagnant wages. The technology itself isn't the problem. The real issue is always who controls it and who shares in its benefits. So what's happening at Meta offers a glimpse of a challenge workers in many industries are likely to face. AI isn't simply replacing jobs outright. It's reorganizing workplaces, consolidating responsibilities, and changing the balance of power between workers and employers. So the challenge isn't just learning how to use AI. It's ensuring that workers have a voice in how AI is deployed and a claim on the wealth it helps create. Because if the future of work is being built around AI, workers should have a say in the rules, not simply be expected to absorb the consequences. And that leaves the real question, not whether AI works, it's whether workers will have a say in how it's used. Always and forever to the fight back. All these stories point to the same reality. Workers aren't just expressing frustration, they're organizing around it. Think back to the first half of today's episode. We talked about workers struggling with inflation, young people having trouble finding stable careers, professors worried about losing a voice in their workplaces, and workers facing uncertainty from technological change. When enough people start experiencing the same pressures, eventually a question emerges. What can workers actually do about it? And for much of labor history, the answer has been fucking organize. That's why AFL-CIO President Liz Shuler's announcement this week is significant. Speaking at the Federation's Constitutional Convention, Shuler unveiled the goal of helping organize 2 million new union members over the next 5 years. The plan would expand organizing campaigns, strengthen support for workers seeking union representation, and coordinate efforts among affiliated unions. Shuler argued that worker interest in unions presents a major opportunity for the labor movement, saying, quote, "The future of the labor movement depends on organizing at a scale we haven't seen in generations."
Now, we have taken some huge steps together these past 4 years, haven't we? Haven't we? We said, if you remember, we said we would organize 1 million new workers over the next 10 years. Well, guess what? We got it done in 3. We expanded this federation from 57 unions to 65 unions, now 15 million workers strong and growing. And we took the single biggest step in decades to unify the labor movement. 2 million SEIU members are back in the House. And up against the most relentless attacks we have ever seen, we've stuck together, we've stayed unified, and today, union membership is at its highest level in 16 years. And we've used every bit of that power in the past 18 months, haven't we? When Donald Trump ripped away the collective bargaining of 1 million federal workers, the single biggest act of union busting in American history, did we back down? No. Hell no. We rallied behind them, we organized, and we brought tens of thousands of new federal workers into this movement. We've shown people all over this country there is a way to fight back, and it's called the labor movement. And now it's time to use that power to build an economy that actually works for working people. How many of us have flipped on that TV and heard how great this economy is? How incredible that the Dow hit another record high. Well, for the reporters in this room who believe that, there are 2,000 real people here that you can talk to. They can tell you about the actual economy, the one that no one on Wall Street has thought about for more than 5 seconds. Whether you're a Democrat, Republican, independent, rent is too damn high. Your paycheck doesn't stretch as far as it used to. You walk into the grocery store, you pick up one of those tuna fish cans that I talked about earlier, and you ask yourself, when did shit get so expensive? And part of it is this guy, a president who has the gall to say, I don't care about Americans' financial situations, getting us into needless wars, using tariffs in a chaotic way against our allies, giving more attention to his ballroom than the workers who are building it. But that economic pain, the uncertainty workers are living through right now, it didn't start with Donald Trump, and it won't end with Donald Trump. It's going to end because we take on an entire system that has left working people behind. And we put in place an economy that values real work. So are we ready to say no to CEOs who hand themselves $98 million a year while their workers are struggling to get by on food stamps? Are we ready to say no to the big tech executives who want to play God with our jobs and our futures? Are we ready to say hell no to billionaires like Peter Thiel, who spend their lives taking from our communities and then run away to Argentina when things get tough? Hell no, thank you. A rising tide doesn't do any good if it's only lifting up the yachts. Working people We don't run when things get tough. We stay and we fight for our families and our communities and our futures. That is the grit that I see in workers all over this country.
But organizing workers is only the first step. Winning an election and winning improvements on the job are not the same thing. Consider Amazon warehouse workers on Staten Island. They won a landmark union election in 2022 and still don't have a first contract. Think about Starbucks. The organizing wave that began in Buffalo in 2021 has now produced more than 12,000 unionized baristas, yet those workers still don't have contracts either. Add to that the more than $1.5 billion reportedly spent on union-busting efforts in the U.S. last year, and a pattern starts to emerge. Workers can win the right to bargain. Actually getting a contract is often a completely different battle. That reality helps explain why the Faster Labor Contracts Act has attracted so much attention. The bipartisan bill passed the House of Representatives by a vote of 230 to 193, with 20 Republicans joining Democrats in support. Sponsored by Representative Donald Norcross, the legislation aims to address a long-standing problem in labor relations: employers delaying negotiations after workers vote to unionize. According to Bloomberg Law data cited in reporting on the bill, newly organized workers wait an average of more than 460 days for a first contract. Under the proposal, employers would have to begin bargaining within 10 days of certification. If negotiations stalled for 90 days, either side could request federal mediation. If mediation failed after another 30 days, a 3-member arbitration panel could impose a binding agreement. Supporters argue that workers who successfully vote for a union should not have to wait years to experience the benefits of collective bargaining. As Norcross put it, no more stop the steals. You got an election, you can get a contract. Teamsters President Sean O'Brien called it one of the most consequential labor bills to come before Congress in generations. Opponents see it differently. Business groups and Republican critics argue that labor contracts are often complex, and that mandatory arbitration represents excessive government involvement in private sector bargaining. The CHRO Association described the measure as draconian, while critics warn that arbitrators could impose terms neither side truly supports. The bill now heads to the Senate, where its future remains uncertain. And if you want to understand why workers care so much about bargaining rights, consider what's happening right now in Fort Morgan, Colorado. More than 1,700 members of a Teamsters Local 455 at a Cargill beef processing facility were locked out after overwhelmingly rejecting the company's contract proposal. Workers voted by roughly 90% against the offer, and shortly afterward found themselves shut out of their workplace. According to union leaders, the dispute centers on wages, health care, workplace safety, and other contract issues. Cargill argues that its proposal represented a substantial investment in employees and says the lockout was necessary because of uncertainty surrounding a potential work stoppage. Think about what a lockout actually means. Most people understand a strike. Workers withhold their labor in an effort to pressure management. A lockout is the reverse. Management withholds work in an effort to pressure workers. In other words, labor disputes are ultimately contests over who can withstand economic pressure longer. The conflict has become significant enough that the Teamsters have filed unfair labor practice charges against the company, while workers continue picketing outside the facility. The dispute also comes at a time when beef prices remain historically high, and the cattle herd is the smallest it's been in decades, making the plant an important part of a strained national food supply chain. What's striking is how familiar the underlying issues sound. Just like the workers we discussed earlier in the episode, these workers aren't talking about abstract economic theories. They're talking about paying bills, affording health care, maintaining safe working conditions, and securing a fair share of the value they help create. Teamsters leaders argue that workers are seeking meaningful improvements after months of bargaining, while Cargill maintains this proposal is fair and economically responsible. And that's why stories like the Faster Labor Contracts Act and the Cargill lockout are really part of the same conversation. Winning a union election matters. Having the legal right to bargain matters. But ultimately, labor relations come down to whether workers have enough collective power to turn those rights into real improvements in their lives. Because a right on paper is one thing. The ability to exercise that right in the face of a multinational corporation is something else entirely. But while workers in Colorado are still fighting over the terms of a contract, workers in Canada recently demonstrated what can happen when that process finally succeeds. Take Walmart workers in Mississauga, Ontario. After a 2-year organizing and bargaining campaign led by Unifor, workers at a Walmart distribution center ratified the first union contract ever reached between Walmart and a union in Canada. The agreement includes wage increases, improved workplace protections, and a lump sum payment connected to allegations that unionized workers have been excluded from broader wage increases. Why does that matter? Because Walmart has spent decades building a reputation as one of the most anti-union corporations in the world. Unifor President Laura Payne praised the workers' determination, saying, quote, "These members were determined to have a workplace democracy, and they stuck with it." She argued the victory could create momentum throughout the warehouse and logistics sector. Economist Jim Stanford framed the struggle in broader terms, describing it as a David and Goliath struggle. His argument was simple. Workers help create enormous wealth, and a union contract gives them a chance to claim a fair share of what they produce. A similar lesson emerged around the World Cup in Los Angeles. More than 2,000 food service and hospitality workers at SoFi Stadium authorized a strike after negotiations with Legends Global stalled. The workers, cashiers, cooks, bartenders, dishwashers, and food attendants were seeking higher wages, stronger job security, and protections against subcontracting and automation. But this dispute wasn't only about wages. Many workers also expressed concern about immigration enforcement and FIFA security requirements. The union argued that workers should not have to choose between keeping their jobs and protecting themselves and their families. As Unite Here Local 11 put it, workers must have the right to walk off the job if federal immigration enforcement enters the stadium and creates a reasonable fear for their safety. No worker should have to choose between their job and their freedom. The strike threat created significant pressure because replacing workers immediately before one of the world's largest sporting events would have been extremely difficult. Since then, the union and Legends Global have reached a tentative agreement that averted a strike before the tournament opener, but the broader concerns raised by the workers remain unresolved.
Okay, you guys, we won the vote. Now we really need your support. We need all of us to get together. We need to show SoFi that we are serious. We need to tell them that we are done. We're going to show them we're done. They can't do our job. Let me tell you. Could you see them coming into our positions, trying to serve, trying to cook, trying to bartend? Let's let them do it. Let's show them who they really need and why they need to pay us for what we are worth. Come on, you're not going to lose your job, so let's go and beat the heck out of SoFi and get what we want. Without us, you don't have a stadium. So, strike, strike, strike. See you guys at the strike line.
And then there's West Virginia, where a much smaller strike highlights many of the same issues. Nearly 50 members of Teamsters Local 175 have remained on strike against the beverage market since mid-May, after unanimously rejecting proposed contract concessions. Workers say the company wants to increase health insurance costs, weaken retirement benefits, and potentially eliminate jobs. What's interesting is how familiar these concerns sound. Whether we're talking about a global sporting event, one of the largest retailers in the world, or a regional beverage distributor, workers are raising many of the same issues: healthcare, retirement security, job protection, and workplace voice. Striker Ian Moore described the support workers have received from the community, saying, quote, "They've donated food, water, anything we needed, firewood, everything that we needed out there." Meanwhile, Teamsters Local 175 Secretary-Treasurer Luke Farley argued that management still wants workers to move backward, while workers maintain they're prepared to remain on strike until a fair agreement is reached. So if there's a theme connecting today's stories, it's insecurity. Workers worried about inflation, young people struggling to enter the labor market, professors fighting to maintain a voice, remote workers facing isolation, night shift workers paying hidden health costs, tech workers navigating AI-driven restructuring, and workers across multiple industries organizing for contracts and better conditions. These stories aren't isolated. They're different expressions of the same question: who has power in the economy? Because when workers have power, wages rise, benefits improve, schedules become more humane, workplaces become more democratic. When workers don't have power, even economic growth can leave people feeling left behind. The labor movement has always understood something many economists forget. The economy isn't a machine. It's a collection of human relationships. And the measure of a healthy economy isn't simply how much wealth it produces. It's whether the people creating that wealth can live secure, dignified lives. And that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching, and to my audio people, thanks for listening. Please like and share so I can get this message out to more of our brothers and sisters, and hit that subscribe button. I'm proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, with over 200 shows and podcasts from around the country and around the world. You can check them out at laborradionetwork.org. I'll see you next week. Solidarity, always.